Nikita Koloff, the Russian nightmare, no, the devil's nightmare, here from It's Time to Man Up, challenging men to step into their true manhood. Your chosen Truth Network podcast is starting in just a few seconds. Enjoy it, share it, but most of all, thank you for listening to the Truth Podcast Network.
This is the Truth Network.
The heart of every man craves a great adventure, but life doesn't usually feel that way. Jesus speaks of narrow gates and wide roads, but the masculine journey is filled with many twists and turns. So how do we keep from losing heart while trying to find the good way when life feels more like a losing battle than something worth dying for? Grab your gear and come on a quest with your band of brothers who will serve as the guides in what we call the masculine journey. The masculine journey starts here now.
Welcome to the Masculine Journey. We are very glad that you're with us this week. And again, I know I say that every week, but we're very grateful for our listeners out there. And we had one reach out to us today, David, that said it was good to hear your voice. Specifically. Yeah, you'd have to get a microphone. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you definitely didn't prep me for that one.
Yeah, I just discounted it because I thought they probably weren't very sane. No, it was it was Bob from Boot Camp.
Your fan,
nice.
Your fan has called.
Your fan.
Right.
So that's 100% more than me, Danny, Rodney. So that's good.
I mean, I definitely don't want to put you guys to shame with that. So.
Yeah, don't put it. It'd be a shame to do that. But Bob said it was good to hear your voice on the the
awesome.
air.
Well, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, so he'll hear that, and Bob may join us next week, so that would be great on a phone call. So anyway, this week's topic, it would be a shame if you would miss it, as David was kind of alluding to, because we are continuing the topic of the devil's toolbox, or what is it, Rodney? What are we calling it? Do you remember?
Tools of the enemy.
That was close. Yeah, I was close. Yeah, I paraphrased a little bit.
I like. Hey,
that was the Sam Standard
toolbox
version.
Works great.
Yeah, Toolbox works great. And so it's the things that we're in our pillar series, and it's the things where the enemy uses against us. And we're getting down to the topic of shame this week.
Yeah, this one has been out there for quite some time that we knew we were going to get to because it just encompasses us so much. And you guys did a great talk on that last boot camp. That was the first time that you guys did some kind of different content on our own. And you, Andy, and Robbie gave a great talk on that, which basically I think opened our eyes to a lot of different things in our lives of what actually is really introduced shame into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a pretty common thing that the enemy uses in many, many different ways. And so we're going to try to talk through that. And I'm very confident that anyone out there listening has felt this at some point.
Yes. It's something that, you start thinking back and it's like real easy. This is one that's generally pretty easy to find lots of shame. You may not always want to admit it, but it's one of those things that, as we have learned through the masculine journey, as we get out and tell other people about some of the shameful things that we have either felt, done to others, it's something that really lightens the load on your heart and helps you get your heart back.
Yeah, one of the main tools the enemy uses is condemnation, right? And always on the back side of condemnation is a shame attack. Mm-hmm. He's just not going to let it sit there.
Yeah, and we had done condemnation earlier, and that's what's beautiful about these tools is he doesn't care. He'll pull them all out and use them all against you.
Yeah, continually.
Yeah.
Right. So, Andy, you have the first clip. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so it's from Despicable Me, and it's the girls are from this orphanage, and they come back, and the orphanage has them out selling. And
selling cookies.
Selling cookies, yeah, like Girl Scout cookies or something. Yeah. And they didn't do so hot, but it gets into, if you listen to it, it gets a lot into a performance-based mentality, and it gets into, really feeling that orphan spirit.
Yeah, and there's something in the corner.
Yep.
We'll talk about that when we come back?
Right.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and play it.
Hi, Miss Hattie. We're back.
Hello, girls.
Anybody come to adopt us while we were out?
Let me think. No. Edith, what did you put on my desk?
A mud pie.
You're never going to get adopted, Edith. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, I know.
Good. So how did it go, girls? Did we meet our quotas?
Sorta. We sold 43 mini mints, 30 choco swirlies, and 18 coconutties.
You say that like it's a great sale day. Look at my face. Do you still think it's a great sale day? 18 coconutties. I think we can do a little better than that. Don't you? Yeah. We wouldn't want to spend the weekend in the box of shame, would we? No.
No, Miss Hattie.
Okay, good. Off you go. Go clean something of mine.
Hi, Penny. Hi, guys.
So as you hear that, you can hear there's quite a bit of shame bit passed out. One thing that we talk about, I think we talked about when we did the shame talk at boot camp, was shame is more than just a single event. You did something bad, you get judged for it, you get reprimanded for it. It's a continual thing tied to your identity. Mm-hmm. And so you heard in there, he said, you'll never get adopted doing this. So there was, you're going to get adopted because based on your performance, and you're never going to get adopted if you don't improve that. So, you're here when you hear never and always, that is an agreement that we've talked about. Shame is tied to agreements. So that whole idea of never and always, the enemy loves to use those to tie you to a situation that's never going to change. You're always going to be like this. You have no way out, and you're stuck in the box of shame like Penny was.
Yeah, and so you have the, whatever her name is, Miss, what was it?
Hattie,
Miss Hattie, yeah. I only played it like 12 times before the show. I should have known. But Miss Hattie, she's there reminding them that you're always going to be an orphan.
Yeah.
Right? And so, as you said earlier, it's an attack on identity.
Mm-hmm.
These all tie in together. The enemy uses them all with one another. It's like his magic toolbox, right? That he pulls out, and he hits you with one, then he hits you with another, and he hits you with another, and they're all kind of tied in together. And it can be a single sin, but typically it's a habitual sin. But it can be that he'll tie it to whatever he can get to stick to you.
Yep.
It's
it could be setting the bar high for athletics, and you never reach something, so you're never considered an athlete or good. Or you could be, a sales. I'm in sales now, so I can identify that. You didn't make a quota, All right, quit giving hassling Danny over there.
I think he's hassling Rodney indirectly.
Well, I got a funny look when athletics were mentioned because Rodney looked at me because he's the athlete. He makes that point quite regularly.
Well, the point that he actually makes is you're not.
Well, I have a clip in the show.
That's true. Good point.
Touche.
So
yeah, but our box of shame is the light switch at
It
boot
is.
camp.
Right. Yeah.
That's our box of shame. I know, David. That's what you're getting into.
All right.
That's right. You're the light. You're the light technician for this next boot camp.
Danny's getting out of the box.
You can put that on your resume, lighting technician. So back to shame as we try to cast
Shame
some on
each
one
other.
another.
So one of the things I wanted to point out there too is I think that I brought this up when I saw that this week on Facebook, the box of shame, and it made me think. A lot of us are in that box of shame, not realizing that Jesus can easily destroy that cardboard box of shame if we allow him to step into it. That is what the cross and the resurrection is for, is to destroy that shame. But that identity and him speaking into our life has to come from him, and it'll set that box on fire.
But even when you're absolutely right. But even when you get your boot camp, you get a new name, you get, your identity that God's really pulling out of you back or pouring back into you, whatever you want to look at it, you've gotten healing. It doesn't stop the enemy from trying to shame you.
No.
Right. And so when you talked about the other day in our group text about it was a cardboard box, the thought that came to my mind is just push through it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if we know the truth
and
God's told us the truth and we find ourselves in that box of shame, Jesus can step in, but he can also allow us to step out.
Right, absolutely.
And say, no, I'm going to step out and trust what you've already told me more than I trust what I think I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Either way, it's an easier out than what we think. We build it into not a cardboard box, but a stone wall box,
Yeah, death to self sounds real easy, but you have to live it out.
Yeah.
And you have to make moves. You have to take action. You have to speak things into your own life. You have to be around other men and women that are in Christ, and you have to form this community because it's not something that you just go out and you just, I got this myself. pull you up by the bootstraps.
Right.
It's like, oh no, you're going to. And that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do.
It's not trivial. Most all of us, we got this from Adam. We're gonna default to that our whole lives unless we really walk into God saying, "Yeah, you are a son. You have the power over this."
One of the most enlightening things for me, and I probably should have used the clip, now that I think of it, but it was John Lynch when he talks about, you can yell at the caterpillar all day long for not being a butterfly, because when you test his DNA, it's going to come back as a butterfly. And you can yell at him all day long, and all it's going to do is hurt his little ears, is what John says. And it's funny, but the reminder of our DNA, our godly DNA is already wired in us, right? And we're becoming that along the way. And so the enemy knows that, and he tries to stop it at different points and attack it. He attacks the identity. He attacks your sin. He calls you by your sin. We'll talk about that later, that type of thing. Harold?
Most often what we hear is shame on you, but Alan Wright, a local minister here in Winston-Salem, has a book called Shame Off You, and that would be a good way to address this issue.
Yeah, and for me, anybody ever saw my front teeth would see that, it's been a point of shame my whole life. In fact, I one time waited on a customer and their child says, "Look, Mommy, you could drive a Mack truck through his front teeth."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But if your front teeth, right, your whole life, you're like, and it is a box of shame that you really, it almost seems concrete and all those kind of things, because it is this sense of you're inferior. But it's interesting how that's tied to iniquity, because the only reason that my teeth look bad is compared to your teeth. Right? But compared to my teeth look exactly like my teeth were supposed to look like. I mean, it's obviously the way God made me. And if I don't compare myself, right, then I'm not in iniquity. And it's an interesting trap that you'd put yourself in, right? And it took me years, literally, of laughing at myself to be able to deal with, that. And don't think the enemy doesn't use that every time you look in the mirror, that you go, oh, them teeth, man.
I commend you, Robbie. I grew up with the same type of gap, and I had mine fixed with caps because I was so self-conscious that I wouldn't smile. That, and I'd leave big rows of corn when I tried to eat corn on the cob. It was like, the second feast. I could come back and eat more. But,
Robbie, I want to say, though, you really have a nice head of hair. Danny and I say so.
Yeah. Understand. We're going to break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about shame. Go to masculinejourney.org to register for the upcoming boot camp coming up November 17th through 20th, or for the entrenchment at the end of September, 1st of October.
One of my favorite things about boot camp, the favorite thing about boot camp, is every time I go, I encounter God. And as anyone that has encountered God knows, generally speaking, it's nothing we expect. Real encounter with God out of the blue. He knew what I needed. I knew what I wanted, and those two were rarely the same thing.
Register today at masculinejourney.org.
One of the things that's been a true joy to me is having my sons go with me to boot camps and watching them get an understanding that I wished I would have had at their age. It took me several years, and I'm still probably learning it a little bit as we go, but watching them get a good foothold into manhood and understanding what's important, what their role is, and how to stay away from the enemy, to receive healing and restoration in the way that you love on others.
Register today at masculinejourney.org.
You're no good, baby, you're no good. I'm gonna say it again. You're no good, you're no good, you're no good, baby, you're no good.
So that's you're no good.
From Linda Ronstadt.
That's all I got.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, Andy had the bump, and we were talking on the phone the other day, and he said, "Hey, what about this song?" And so it was really good for that. It's someone being attacked.
The enemy likes to say that. Likes to tell you that, and it is repetitive.
Yeah, and it's constant, and relentless would be the word.
Relentless. There we go.
Yeah. You guys just passing the mic around, or one of you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to figure it out, you know.
Okay, no worries. Well, we do have another clip that we could go to, and Robbie, this is your clip.
We do. It's the clip that I actually used when we did the talk at boot camp on shame. As I was studying Hebrew, as you might imagine, and you know where this comes up in the Bible is not. You don't have to go far, because you know there in Genesis 2, it says that Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame, right? And therein lies the original, you know, before Genesis 3, that there wasn't any. And so interestingly, as I studied this throughout the scriptures, nakedness is very much connected to the word. That you'll find it many, many times, even into the book of Revelation, that you need to, he cautions you to buy clothes to cover your nakedness. But clearly, Carrie Ten Boom had been this Dutch lady whose family had protected Jews in Nazi Germany. They got betrayed by a fellow Dutchman, ended up going into the prison camps themselves, and treated absolutely horribly, as you'll hear in this clip.
Ravensbrück, the notorious extermination camp for women located in northern Germany. It was also a training center for female SS guards who were infamously inhumane and cruel. Along with other prisoners, Corrie and Betsy were made to strip naked and walk in front of Nazis and their guards for inspection.
The first time was the worst. I've never felt so humbled, so miserable, so cold. When I stood there and Betsy, my sister, stood beside me, I said, Betsy, I cannot bear this. This is so terrible. And I thought that I could break under the burden of that suffering. And then suddenly it was as if I saw Jesus at the cross. And the Bible says, they took his garments. He hanged there naked. And by my own suffering, I understood only a fraction of the suffering of Jesus.
So I discovered even today, as I thought more about the word in Hebrew, it's bush, but it's connected to the idea of blushing. And the idea is if you get naked, you blush. And you know, if you get caught with your mask off, right, as we often do when we've got our pose going and the mask comes down and we get caught with that, we blush. And that blush is our shame. But the idea of that B sound at the beginning of that word is a bet, and it's always connected to your identity, right? And so it's something that needs to be covered. Well, I personally believe that it's there on purpose so that we need a covering, but the covering is Jesus' blood. But we cover it with all sorts of elaborate fig leaves and all sorts of other things, even after you understand Jesus' blood and all sorts of things. But as we get closer to God and we feel more comfortable with his blood, we're able to take off those masks and allow the good ground, right? To die to yourself, as Rodney says, to allow to take his identity rather than the gap-toothed, character that I may think I might be or whatever. I can take on the identity of Christ and worry about what he thinks about me, not worried about what the world thinks about me.
Thank you, Robbie. Some of the things on agreements, it would be hard pressed to find an agreement that's not based out of shame. Right? When you hear things from the enemy like you're not enough, you don't matter, no one is coming for you, no one's coming after you, right, to help you, you're on your own, you're alone, whatever those things sound like, behind it is identity attack and shame. Right? If I'm not enough, then I'm inconsequential. I don't have any worth or value. Right?
Marginalized.
Marginalized, as we talked about last week. Right? You don't matter. No one's coming from you. I'm not a priority. I grew up with that one a lot. Right? And always feeling like, I was not a priority in a lot of people's lives. It was important to me. And it was just an agreement from the enemy. It wasn't true. But when you look at it through that agreement lens, shame is all you can see. on the other side of that. And so scriptural stories, what comes to mind? Is there anything that comes to mind? Let me say the scripture from John 8:44 when he's talking about the enemy. You belong to your father, the devil. You want to carry out your father's desires. Now, this is the part about Satan. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks in his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Right? But those lies feel so true. He'll say something that sounds kind of true,
yeah,
and then we jump on it.
Yeah, he did it to Jesus in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Took Old Testament scriptures and twisted them, and he does it to us all the time.
Yeah, with me, it's not necessarily scripture. He has plenty of other, stuff he could use for me.
That's back to your own words back at you, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of them there.
Yeah. So the shame part is something you can actually just get rooted in and stay in. Mm-hmm. It has a very strong grip on you, and if it wasn't for this group of guys here that I saw being vulnerable, I would not have been able to talk about half the stuff in my life until I'm like, oh, thank goodness there's other people that have gone through the same stupid stuff that I've done and had to live with the same shame that I've had to live with. And you can offload an awful lot of that by sharing it. Don't just go share with anybody. If you can find a good, solid brother, is a good place for men to start. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily always even recommending, hey, starting with the wife, because there's some things you want to share there that you may not want to share. But it's like you got to figure out how you may want to get with a good, solid group of at least a brother or a band of small brothers that, do share life. Because when you see this group, these guys share so much, and they invite people in through their sharing. And that just allows you to grow in your own recovery from your own shame.
Yeah, and you definitely want to walk with God through it. The prayer that I'd recommend is pray, God, bring someone into my life, but let me know when it's the person.
Kind of like
right?
Danny share his prayer for a wife.
Yeah. Well, and I remember, if you're John Lynch's talk on, walking into the house of grace versus, and when he got in there, that he immediately said, "No, I'm not fine." Because there was that. At the other church, he walked in. Why everybody had to be fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. So he walks into this one. I'm not fine. I'm struggling with whatever it was, and he goes, "I'll raise your, whatever pain you're dealing. And up you with some chronic back pain and hemorrhoids or whatever, whatever it is like."
Yeah, the guy yells, "Is that all you got?"
Because, we're ashamed of where we actually are. Mm-hmm. It's quite often, especially in church, it seems like, oh my goodness, I don't want to admit that I'm suffering like crazy in my faith and suffering like crazy and this and that. But oh my goodness, when you go into the house of grace and you realize you're still God's favorite, and the fact that that your weakness is what makes you strong.
Mm-hmm. Shame can very much drive performance. I think about the years that I didn't feel like I had what it took at home, so I would stay at work because I didn't have that shameful feeling. And it wasn't anything that anyone was doing to me at home. It wasn't like I was hearing that. I was just feeling that from the enemy. Right? And so those years I could go to work and I could feel okay there because I could feel successful and there wasn't a shame to it, and all it did was drive me away from my family.
Well, going back to, it's tied to your identity. Yeah. Growing up, I write left-handed. And I was ashamed of that for a long time because kind of like a minority at times. And it shamed me so much that I changed my handwriting to look like a right-handed. And I still slant it the way like a right-hander would. And just because I just learned to write that way. But like Robbie was talking about, I've learned that it's part of who I am. Now I play golf right-handed. I do that decent, Rodney, just so before you jump on the bandwagon over there. And so, but, the different things, and I can do things I pick at Michelle because she's a school teacher. I said, I'm amphibious. She said, it's ambidextrous. I said, well, I can swim too. Does that count? So, but it is part of your identity, and it's what the enemy goes, yeah, you're different.
Yeah.
You're not like the rest of them.
Yeah, something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
Right, something's broken there. So, Andy, we were talking earlier about Jesus and Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Would you mind sharing some of that?
Yep. So I didn't use it in the shame talk when we were at boot camp, but I used it in a recent thing with the Ohio team. But, it really, Lord put it on my heart, I feel like. I've always loved the John 21 story where, Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus comes after his resurrection, and they're all out fishing, and Jesus comes up and he's cooked breakfast for him, and he starts having this conversation with Peter. Well, if you think about it, Peter, he's still hanging with the guys, but he had to be carrying some serious shame. They all knew that Jesus called it out ahead of time, but he denied Jesus 3 times. There's a lot of shame that goes with that. And Jesus came after him, and he asked him 3 times, Peter, do you love me? And then he told him to feed his lambs and his sheep. But during that, he basically said, I don't care what you've done. I still love you. I still have a purpose for you, and I'm going to use you. And that's where Peter got his ministry back. He was out back fishing. And a shame will drive you away from your calling if you let it, if you allow the enemy to come in and tell you something other than what God says about you.
Yeah, and shame affects your personality. It affects how you treat others' hearts. Right? If I'm living in shame, I'm not typically going to be good to other people's hearts in the meantime. And so just take it this week and go to God and say, Father, help me to see the times that the enemy's got me to believe this shame that's not true. Help me to break some agreements. Help me find a friend to share my heart with, those types of things. And then also go to masculinejourney.org, register for the boot camp coming up and the entrenchment coming up, which is free, like Robbie says, free. And go to masculinejourney.org. We'll talk to you next week.
This is the Truth Network.